We start with the man whose catchphrase gave this series its title. Certainly there'll never be another Max Miller.
What? Nah.
The thing that I remember about Max,
Michael Grade,
was the extraordinary hubbub amongst the audience. Before he came on, there was a fantastic sense of, he's going to be on in a minute, which one has only seen really with pop stars.
He was one of those comedians that the audience laughed at before he came on.
George Melly.
He was a comedian who built up such anticipation, such pleasure in advance.
It's just sheer joy.
Barry Cryer.
The applause breaks out as soon as the first couple of notes of his signature tune start.
I'm ready for bed now. Anybody? Here, listen.
He was just among his own. They adored him. And to watch him work, I mean, much overworked word charisma, but the command of the audience was just astonishing.
Oh, you wicked lot. You're the kind of people who get me a bad name.
I didn't really understand the innuendos and all that. I do now, and having seen the film footage of him and relived what I remember in my mind from a professional point of view, I realised just how great he was. His rapport with an audience was he knew where to look, he knew when to pause, and he would just play on the audience's sense of naughtiness. And of course, in those days, we lived in a fairly Victorian, straight-laced society, and he was the naughty postcard from the seaside. So he was really an event. It was an event to see Max Miller.
You remember the last time I was here, I sang for you a song. As you know, the songs I sing, I do write myself, and you can only hear them when I sing them. Nobody else dares sing them. I sang a song called Annie and Fanny. Do you remember? Do you remember it, don't you? Well, I'm not going to sing it tonight. I'm writing another one now, a sequel to Annie and Fanny, and it's called A Fan Dancer Minus Her Fan. That's like without, see? A fan dancer minus her fan. I haven't finished it yet. I haven't finished it. I'm working on it now. I've got the beginning, and I've got a part at the end, but what I'm after is that middle bit. That's what I want. Forget that, I'll be all right. I'll give you a rough idea what it's all about. I'm not going to give you a lot. You're not going to have a lot, because I want it when I come back, you see. I started courting a smashing fan dancer. To marry her, that was my plan. Now it's all off with the smashing fan dancer. She fell down and damaged her fan. Here.
My mother, a spectacled middle-class Leeds woman, she loved him. She got a very good twinkle going when he was on. He was the nice woman's naughty boy. He'd be pretty innocent now, because it was all double entendre or not finishing the line. Now then was his catchphrase when he didn't finish a line. I'm paraphrasing slightly, but one of his rhymes or songs was, I love the girls who do, I love the girls who don't.
I hate the girl who says she will, and then she says she won't. But the girl I like the best of all, and I think you'll sound right, is the girl who says she never does, but she looks as though she... Yeah, do you know what I do?
And he wouldn't finish the line, and all he was going to say was might. To create some wonderful mystery and naughtiness about you were going to say might, I think is brilliant.
Max Miller was exceptional.
Nicholas Parsons.
I had the privilege, as a youngster, going to Victoria Palace and seeing him work there. And he came on. Of course, he had his audience. He'd already built them up, and they came, with followers. So he came on this unbelievably garish dressing gown. And he had that wonderful cheeky grin and smile and those beautiful teeth. And he had this cheekiness about him, that twinkle in the eye. And so, having got his audience, they were looking for the naughtiness. They were looking for the double-entendre. So he was halfway there already, because some of his jokes were utterly innocent by today's standards. I mean, when you hear the things you do today, even on television, Max would never have indulged in that. He was never blatant, you see, never obvious. It was all suggested. It was all in the mind. And he'd actually castigate his audience. He said, well, you are naughty. And I remember one joke he did there, and I don't know why one joke sticks rather than another. I suppose as an actor, you love timing, and Max was a past master of timing. I mean, what I always say, the art of acting is timing, but the art of comedy acting is very refined timing. And Max was a great artist. His timing was impeccable. And he said, I'll tell you what I'm going to do now. I'll tell you what now listen. It was always, now listen. And then we began to chuckle because you knew something naughty was coming. Now listen, I'll tell you what I'm going to do now.
It says in the white book, a mother of eight set up late, stitching her husband's pyjamas. See page 4, Blue Book. There's the answer. A stitching time saves 9. Now,
I'll tell you what I'm going to get on with now. It's perfectly innocent, but they fell about.
I find it quite strange, this whole myth about Max Miller, that only if you had a dirty mind would you find him funny, that he dealt with subtle double entendres, because he quite clearly didn't. It's quite obvious that he was telling filthy jokes.
Kevin Day, one of the younger generation of comedians who admires Max Miller.
And that's what the audience wanted. He was telling them in such a way as to not be censored, as simple as that. He wasn't coy. It wasn't stuff that you'd find funny on a different level. It was just filthy jokes. I mean, jokes like a bus breaking down full of passengers and the bus driver leaning over the engine and the conductor says, do you need a screwdriver? And he says, well, we're 15 minutes late as it is. There's no other level that joke works on. There's no single entendre. It was a joke about sex, which is one of the reasons I think that Max Miller still resonates today, because he was one of the few comics that openly celebrated sex and admitted to the audience that they had sex and they enjoyed it, and did it in that fantastic way by adopting that conspiratorial tone and leaning down to them and pretending to look out for the manager and the stage manager and pretending that they were the only audience grown up enough to understand those jokes.
I said, would you like to go for a drive? She said, no thanks, I'm too tired, I'd sooner walk. Well, we hadn't gone far in the car when all of a sudden the car stopped. I said, the car's broken down. She said, well, what happens now? I shouldn't be a bit surprised. I said, I'll tell you what, we're going to have a drink. So we went to the bar. I said, what will you have? She said, well, I don't think I'll have a whiskey. I said, well, don't have it if you don't want it. I wouldn't force her, you know what I mean. She said, I don't think I'll have a port. I said, can I make a suggestion? She said, yes. Well, let's have the drink first. So we had the drink, and when we came out, the car had gone. And there were 2 bicycles outside the hotel. So we took the 2 bicycles, and away we went. We hadn't gone far. We had 4 punctures. Not 2, 4. There was a fork in the road. So I said, I'll tell you what we'll do. We'll lie down behind this hedge and wait till the morning. She said, why wait till the morning? I said, well, because I've got to get home, because my wife's a very suspicious woman. If I go home with a hair on my coat, I've got to take her around the stable and show the horse. I said, I was out all one night looking for a ginger horse. You can't find them.
Here's a funny thing. Now, this is a funny thing. There's a lady down there got opera glasses on me. She thinks I'm a racehorse. Last night I was in the mood, tonight I was get some sleep. A little asides, and he'd tune up his guitar, and he'd look at the conductor in the pit, and he'd tune up, he's going to sing a little song, and he'd twang the guitar.
Get some nice chords on this, can't you? If you know where to put your fingers.
There's a famous story of Max, who really only played London because he liked to get home to Brighton. But there was also a problem with his material outside of London with the watch committees, who were the local censorship people. And he was booked in Birmingham, and everyone said, oh, the Birmingham Watch Committee, who were notorious, sort of smut finders. And the watch committee sent for him and said, we hear you're very blue, Mr. Miller. We're minded not to approve your script. So he said, well, I haven't got it all written down. He said, but I'll perform it for you now. And he went through his act for the watch committee, but without performing it. He just sort of droned on. And the farmer said to the blonde and the this, that, and it just sort of droned on and on and on. And they said, well, we can't see anything wrong with that. Fine, of course. The same material with the lights and the makeup and the looks and the timing. Oh, it's a completely different script. Same words, but a different meaning.
At the Prince of Wales, the watch committee came in and he said, well, they've been in, they've cut a lot out. I haven't got an act for the night. True. And my father thought about it. He said, well, I'll tell you what to do. go on and tell them that they cut your act out and tell them the jokes you heard this other fella using and they haven't cut him. He said, that's brilliant, Dad. And that's what he did. He went on and he did all his gags, but he said, they won't let me do it. He said, this geezer, he said, he went in and he said, I'll tell you this, he said, I was with the wife. He said, I walked out. The wife stayed to get the gag, but I walked out. And this fella said, just left the wife in bed smoking. And the other fella said, you're lucky, I can't get mine warm. Now, they said that on the stage in front of the people, and nobody objected, but me, and that's what he did. And he got away with it for the rest of the week.
Jimmy Casey, whose father, Jimmy James, played the music halls with Max. Although one Max Miller joke was much the same as another on the smut scale, Max always teased his audiences with the notion that his jokes came from two books. The white book, clean, and the blue book. Well, blue.
And by that you can gather I've got two sorts of stories. I'm going to tell you what had the white book first. It says in the white book, listen, there was a little girl who had a little curl right in the middle of her forehead. When she was good, she was very, very good, and when she was bad, she was very, very popular. Now, listen, you can't expect too much in the white book. This is the book. This is where we all get pinched. I don't care, I'll go, I've been before. I have. I won't walk, I make them get the bar out. Jack and Jill went up the hill just like two cock linnets. Jill came down with £1/crown. She wasn't up there too. Yeah, I've got her.
He was a naughty boy, really, telling jokes that he shouldn't, the blue book and the white book. Now, don't laugh at this joke, lady, because the manager, he'll hear you laugh. You know I've given you one from the blue book. So don't laugh, whatever you do, don't laugh. You know, and he would just play his audience like a fly fisherman.
Listen. You listen. Right. Father and son. The boy be about 8 or 9. He might be 9 or 10, we don't know. Who cares, anyway? 8 or 9. His father took him around a cattle show on Saturday afternoon where the farmers were buying the bulls and the cows, mostly bulls, when all of a sudden, the little boy saw a farmer go up to a bull, and the farmer started feeling the bull. All along the back he was feeling it, all down and all round, feeling him all over. And the little boy said, Daddy, what's he doing? And his father told him. His father said he's feeling it to see if there's any meat on it. If there's any meat on it, he's going to buy it. The boy said, thanks very much, Father, for telling me. 2 or 3 weeks after, the boy went in to see his father. His father was having breakfast. His father said, what do you want? The boy said, I think the butler wants to buy the cook.
I got this job on Midday Music Hall, and we were shown to dressing rooms, and I thought, what are dressing rooms to do with a radio show? And I was sharing with Max Miller. I was quite overawed, and of course he wore his stage costume for radio. You can't work in ordinary clothes, son.
According to Jimmy Casey, Max's spiv look came from Jimmy James.
I first met Max when I was about 10, 11, on the Brighton beach, and he had a hut. And Max had started talking about my father. My father was Jimmy James. And I can still remember the things he said. He said, I first worked with your father. I was his feed, his straight man, in a show called 10 to 1 On, where your father played a racing tipster. And Max said, I was getting £8 a week, and I told them I wanted 10 or I would leave. So they sacked me. And shortly afterwards, I started being a comic. He said, I copied your father's approach from the show, 10 to 1 On, the sort of wide boy, but then your father never did that again, so it didn't matter.
Roy Hudd has another explanation.
I remember his missus saying he was a great circus fan, you know, Max. Loved the circus. And she always reckoned that the clothes, the big +4s and all that, were based on the white-faced clown with the conical hat and always the big baggy sequin trousers. And I'm inclined to believe that. She very seriously believed that, Mrs. Miller, that's where he got the idea from. And she used to make the clothes, but it was Max's idea. He used to say, I want them to grab their attention as soon as I walk on. He certainly did, yeah.
Whatever its origins, the look was pure Max Miller. George Melly.
He always wore a fur coat made from about 900 different animals. And that'd get a laugh. He'd have the white trilby and the black and white shoes. And then he'd take the coat off, and underneath he'd have this incredible suit. The one I remember best was +4s, I think, made of a ridiculous material that looked like 18th century Chinese wallpaper. And he had the hat on, with the white trilby, of course, and the black and white shoes. And I think with the +4s he would have stockings. And the audience laughed when he took his coat off, but they must have seen it and anticipated it again. They laughed at what they already knew. And he used to look at them and say, what if I am?
Well, I wear some nice clothes, don't I, ladies? Some nice clothes, don't I? Now, listen, now shut up. Wow, shut up. I do wear some nice clothes, don't I, ladies? Real taffeta I wear, wow. Oh, shut up.
He made many slightly camp jokes. I think many of the great comics had that camp element. I don't mean he was homosexual at all, I shouldn't imagine. But he was very camp. That was one, you know. What if I am, he used to say. And the other one was, he's a boy, hope so. He always had that side to him.
I go riding Sundays now. Long right in front, side saddle. And last Sunday, everybody was laughing. I didn't know it was a sissy horse, see? No.
And I think camp was an element in the music hall, very definitely. Somehow the old footlights on the makeup gave a slightly sort of transvestite appearance, you know. And the gestures being rather larger than life also, in Miller's case.
I think the reason he was loved so much, though, was because I think he's one of the few comics of the 30s, 40s and 50s that actually appealed to men and women equally, because what you get with a lot of northern comics, women are very much the kind of tyrants in their jokes. They're terrified of the wife or they're terrified of the mother-in-law. Whereas with Max Miller, he loves women. A lot of his material is about trying to be with women, and a lot of the time it's men that are the villains, and he doesn't like the fathers or the husbands, and he tacitly admits that women have sex and enjoy sex and like sharing dirty jokes.
I said to my father, I said, Dad, I said, I want to get married. He said, all right, son, who do you want to marry? I said, I'd like to marry Miss Green. He said, you can't. I said, why not? He said, she's your half-sister. He said, when I was a lad, I had a bike and I got around a bit. I said, all right, I'll marry Miss White. He said, you can't. She's your half-sister. Forget about it. Well, I was a bit despondent and I walked around. My mum said to me, she said, what's wrong with you? I said, well, I said to Dad I wanted to marry Miss Green. And he said, I couldn't because she was a half-sister. I said, all right, well, I'll marry Miss White. He said, you can't. She's your half-sister. She said, look, you go and marry which one you like. He's not your father anyway.
So women liked him, plus the fact he had that flamboyant costume and whatever. And I think men liked him, partly because, he's a bit of a lad, he's a bit of a boy. But men didn't find him a threat because he had that ridiculous camp costume and mannerism about him. So they didn't feel, actually, that he was talking directly to them. They weren't scared of him the way some men might be scared of Joe Brown, for example. They thought it was fantastic.
Now, when I started in this business many years ago, I started in Circus. I'm not a stereotype comedian, don't think that for one moment. When I come out here, I don't know what I'm going to say, but I wouldn't say I don't care, because I do care. I do care. I started in Billy Smart's Circus, Billy Smart. Not the Billy Smart who is today, his father, because I'm much older than Billy. And I remember his father said to me one day, he said, Maxie, would you like to be a lion tamer? I said, I've no desire. He said, there's money in it. I said, what do I have to do? He said, all you've got to do is to walk in the lion's cage and put your head in its mouth. I said, I should think so. He said, are you scared? I said, I'm not scared, I'm just careful. He said, I shouldn't be scared of that lion, he said. That lion's as tame as a kitten, was brought up on milk. I said, so was I, but eat meat. So he advertised for a lion tamer, and a beautiful blonde came along, like they are today. You've seen them, well out in front, a lovely roll desk. And that's a lot of madam and all. That's the ironing board stuck up there. So he said to this blonde, will you go into the cage? Said, I'll go in because I'm a lion tamer. And she walked into the cage. And as she walked into the cage, the lion made a dash for her. And she thought quick, undid a zip, and all her clothes fell off. And she stood there, she came to the world. And the lion, he stopped. Then he started to walk towards her. And when he got near enough, he started to kiss her. And he kissed her all over. And the governor said, would you do that? I said, yes, get the lion out.
Miller differed from most comedians who told rude jokes, in that he talked to the women in the audience. Most of them talked to the men. And the men were sometimes inhibited because they had their wives with them, and if they laughed too much, the wives would say, hey, what's he get up to when I'm not looking, you see? But Miller talked to the women. It added, actually, to his slight air of effeminacy, you know. And because the women laughed, the husbands felt free to laugh, too. And he'd even bring in the women. That joke he tells about the man going home and finding the nudist in the front room. He said, I went in the front room, there was a man there with no clothes on. And then he stops and he says, Can you imagine that lady? As your memory, girl. You see, talking to them. And both of them laughed because they probably could imagine it and they probably did remember it.
He hasn't got a stitch up. I called the wife in. I said, who's this? She said, don't lose your temper, Miller. Don't go raving mad. I said, I'm only asking a fair question. Who is it? She said, he's a nudist and he's coming to use a phone. There's a clever one from the wife, eh?
I can remember seeing old clips of him in his wallpaper flowery suit, which must have caused quite a stir when he walked onto the stage.
Josie Lawrence.
But what I really loved about him was the relationship he had with the audience. He did this wonderful thing like it was gossip. It wasn't a comedy routine, it was gossip. Like he was, come here. And he'd look off to the side of the stage to check that no one was hearing.
He tells me what to cut out, you see. He does, he tells me. I don't take any notice, but he tells me, see.
Frankie Howard used to talk about him a lot because Miller used to keep looking in the wings as if he was sharing a secret with the audience, and he beckoned them to come closer. And Frank saw Miller when Frank was young and learnt a lot from that. This confidential thing that Frankie used to do, the producer thing. That was his version of Miller looking into the wings to see if the theatre manager was there. In other words, I'm going to tell you some jokes now that he doesn't want me to tell you. So you're now in a conspiracy against the theatre manager, which is brilliant. Oh, it's wonderful to watch. Masterclass.
Do you like these black night stucky? Do you like them, lady? Listen, I was going home the other morning at daybreak. I wouldn't venture at night. So going along the country road, I saw a young lady. She was coming towards me. When she got right up near me, I looked at her and I said, can I see you home? She said, no, I'm going the other way. I said, I can turn around, see? So I turned round, and we started to walk in the middle of the road. I said, let's get up on the path. So we get up on the path, and there was all grass on the path, all grass. So I bent down and I felt the grass. I said, some do, and she said, some don't. Good morning. Now listen.
The great thing about a performer like Max Miller was that he took you, the audience, and then you felt it was an individual, into his confidence. So he said, now come here, listen, I'm going to tell you, it's about this woman. No. And he'd do that, and already you were smiling and chuckling, and you knew something naughty or suggestive was coming.
I was in Spain 4 years ago, and in Spain, all the girls, they wear little knives on the top of their stocking. I found that out. So I said to myself, I find exactly what the idea is. So I said, what's the idea of wearing the knife at the top of the stocking? She said, that's to defend my honour. I said, what, a little tiny knife like that? I said, if you were in Brighton, you'd want a set of carvers.
Jack Benny said he was the best front cloth comedian he'd ever seen. A front cloth comedian being a comedian that just goes out and tells jokes in front of a cloth. And Jack Benny described him to my dad as the best he'd ever seen.
Max didn't like American acts, hated Americans. I think because sometimes he had to be second to them, and he was second to no one, And there was the famous story of his Royal Variety Show. The top of the bill was an American. I think it was Jack Benny. Anyway, whoever it was, Max is supposed to do 12 minutes. So he goes on. And Val Parnell, who was the great impresario who ran show business then, he's on the side and he's going berserk. And Max is telling the audience, he said he's doing his nut on the side of this fella. He said, he wants me off. Wants me off. You don't want me off, do you? And they said, no. He said, no. He said, listen, this is my theatre. I was born and bred here. Palladium. He said they told me I had to do 12 minutes and he's got 17. Yeah, I should think so. He'll be lucky. And he went on. And he also did gags, which he said, I had a white book and I had a blue book. So tonight it was all going to be out the white book. Unfortunately, I've lost it. So they've got to be out the other book, you see. So he does this. And he came off the stage and Max Bygraves was sharing the dressing room with him. And he was frightened. And it had nothing to do with him. But he said Val Parnell was absolutely livid. And Max Miller walked in and Parnell said, you, so-and-so. And he said, what's the matter, Val? Something up? He said, you'll never work one of my theatres again. He said, well, you're just £85,000 too late, Val. And like 4 weeks later, he's at Finsbury Park Empire. And he was so big, they couldn't get rid of him. I mean, they created Tommy Trinder to try and bring him down. That was the idea, to get another big stand-up Cockney comic to make Miller toe the line, more or less. But there's no way. He was just king.
Listen. A fellow was ploughing a field. Got halfway through the field, he broke his plough, and he said to himself, it doesn't matter, I can borrow Charlie Smith. He only lives about 5 miles away, and I can walk it in 2 or 3 weeks. So he started to walk, and as he was walking along, after he did about 3 miles, he said to himself, I don't think he'll lend it to me. Now, I feel sure he won't lend it to me. He's that kind of a man. He wouldn't lend anything to anybody, and he kept walking and talking to himself. He won't lend it to me, I know he won't. But when he got to the door, he knocked on the door, and Charlie Smith came to the door, and this fellow looked straight at him, and he said, you know what you can do with your plough, don't you?
As Jimmy Casey said, Max was king, and capable of earning a king's ransom without ever travelling too far from his beloved Brighton. Here's Michael Grade again.
Every region in Britain had its comedians. Liverpool had Rob Wilton, Arthur Askey, Ted Ray was from Liverpool. The North East had Jimmy James, one of the funniest men in the history of funny. Every region had its... There were Cockney comedians, of which Tommy Trinder and Max Miller were par excellence. But I think Max made a very, very good living in the London area and loved to get home, catch the train home to Brighton. He lived down in Brighton. Basically, he played all the, there were hundreds of music halls all over what we would call the Greater London area. But I think he would have travelled, he would have worked wherever he went, frankly.
I remember I was playing a small town, a mining town, and I couldn't find digs. And I went round looking for rooms. And I knocked on the door, and a beautiful woman came to the door, and she said, yes. I said, wait a minute, I haven't asked you yet. She said, you want food? I said, why, is there anything else? I said, could you put me up for the night? She said, I'm full up. I said, but surely you could squeeze me in a back room, couldn't you? She said, I could, but I haven't got time now. You know, busy. So I said, well, how much do you charge? She said, 30 shillings, all in, and I don't want any children. I said, I said, I'm not married. I said, I'm not married. I've always been round-shouldered. She said, well, the best I can do for you, she said, you can sleep with baby if you like. And it costs you £1. I said, that's all right. No, I said, I'm not having that. I can walk about and get wet through. She said, well, will you sleep in the front room on the couch? I said, yes, I'll do that. So I went to sleep in the front room on the couch, and in the early hours of the morning, a beautiful blonde walked in with a cup of tea. I said, who are you? She said, I'm baby. She said, who are you? I said, I'm the mug who slept on the couch.
Southern comics had a bit of a rough ride up north and vice versa. It was quite firmly divided. I think Max Miller wasn't regarded in the same light up north as his contemporaries, who were northern comedians, of course, the Norman Evans and the Frank Randalls and all their own. So, I think southern comics might go up there with a bit of trepidation.
People talk about the fact that he wasn't as popular in the north. I mean, he worked in the north, but it's a myth that he was never laughed at there. But there was different traditions, because the northern comic tradition tended to be character comics, slightly more slow, gormless, a little bit thick, terrified of the wife and the mother-in-law, whereas the southern tradition was more the fast-talking patter. I presume in the Midlands they had fast-talking, thick characters. I'm not sure what the Midlands tradition was. And certainly Max Miller represented the kind of southern London image, a little bit brash, a little bit flash, and we're a little bit cleverer than the rest of the nation, which still exists to this day. I think people forget nowadays, because in Tooting, there are two. So everywhere, so you could work for 15 years in the southeast. You had no need to travel up to the north. So why indeed would you? Why would you take a risk of going up to the north? Certainly before the sort of late 40s and 50s with the radio boom, a lot of people wouldn't know who you were anyway. They wouldn't be aware of you as a star. So why should you go up there to be a complete stranger with a completely different comic dynamic? And you kind of imagine a comic like Max Miller thinking, well, on a cold Monday night in Bolton, the costume isn't going to go down that well, let alone the jokes about Mary from the dairy or whatever.
I think part of it was that, and also part of it was the fact that Max always got the last train. I know that a pal of mine who I was at school with, and his uncle was a bookie. And they always used to go down with Max on that last train down when there was racing in Brighton. And they always used to go on the last train from London to Brighton when Max was working there with Max. And he'd be asleep. You know, he'd fall asleep, Max. And they always, every time they did it, he must have been thrilled. A lovely running gag. They used to tie his toupee to the luggage rack above there. They'd get to Brighton, he'd still be asleep, and they'd say, come on, Max, you're here. And he'd get up and leave the toupee dangling. You bastard!
You're listening to There'll Never Be Another Max Miller on BBC Radio 2, 88 to 91 FM, with me, Graham Garden. Here's Jimmy Casey.
He was noted for being mean, and my father once got a big laugh because he had to leave early at the Prince of Wales to catch the train home. It's supposed to have had a bad back or something. And so my father was on last instead of Miller being last. And for the benefit of the orchestra, really, he said, oh, he's surprised that I'm on now because Max was supposed to be on last, but he had to go home. He's got a bad back. Terrible, terrible. He got a draft, you see. He got this terrible draft. He was standing on the corner over there giving pound notes away. And then and the orchestra just fell about.
I bought him 2 cups of tea, and then we did a run-through. And then we adjourned to Sherlock Holmes pub, and he took me for 2 pints and half of my packet of cigarettes. The legend was true. But the run-through was, he'd brought his own script, which was written on lined notebook paper with a ballpoint pen. He just scribbled something down. And he told a joke, which was much around in those days. And you see the producer holding his head in the box. And he said, you're not telling that, Max, are you? I don't know. I might not. And he's sort of winding the producer up. And live radio. So we adjourned to Sherlock Holmes, and Ray Ellington came up to Max Miller. And a fiver was quite a bet in those days. Pretty solid bet. Ray Ellington whacked a fiver down on the bar and says, there's a fiver, says you're not going to tell the screwdriver joke. So with much hesitance, Max produced his wallet, produced a fiver, and the picture of the Queen blinked in the light. And they had this bet on. So, of course, by the time we got to the show, I was first on, bottom of the bill, obviously, and we were all standing on the side to watch the great Miller, and he went through his routine, and then he sang his song and went off. There was no sign of the screwdriver joke at all. Then back to the Sherlock Holmes, and Ray Ellington came up to Max Miller and said, you owe me a fiver. What are you talking about? You owe me a fiver. You never told the screwdriver joke. I was going to. They flashed that bloody light at me. Wouldn't pay up. Amazing.
We were doing a week with him, myself and Eddie, my partner, and one night as we were coming off, he said, oh, very good that, boys. Oh, thank Mr. Miller, He said, come up to the bar and I'll get you a drink. And there was a ghastly silence, most of all from us, but also from anyone who was within earshot. I couldn't believe it. So, what's he after? He must be trying to nick some of the gags or something, although they were pretty worthless. But anyway, so up we go to the bar, and we sit in the bar, and Max is talking all very interestedly about the business, what we should do. We should change this gag for that and put a different song in and all this stuff. And no movement of the hand towards the pocket at all. And I thought, oh dear. We were on about 11 quid between the two of us, and I thought, this is good, isn't it? Conning a couple of beginners into buying a drink. So I said, oh, what will you have, Mr. Miller? Put that away, he said. I've asked you up here for a drink, now just relax. So you start talking a bit more, and we go on. Went on a bit longer, and Eddie, my pal, looked at me and eyebrows up, and we said, but he said, well, what will you have, Mr. Miller? He said, look, I've asked you up here. I said, I'll get you a drink, now just relax. And then about 10 minutes later, the interval came. We were still up in the bar. It was against the rules and regulations and everything. But the door opened, and in came all the customers, And the first one, he saw him sitting there, said, God, blimey, his old Max himself. What will you have, Max? He said, I'll have a gin and tonic. What will you have, Roy? What will you have, Eddie? So he did get his drink. After all, but he waited 40 minutes.
It's strange for them. It must have seemed very ephemeral because they must have been constantly terrified with new acts coming through. To us, it kind of seems strange because someone like Max Miller was famous for 25 years, which in this day and age is more than 5 lifetimes. You know what I mean? It's very unusual for someone to be at that level for that length of time. But I'm sure all comedians have that insecurity about where the next gig's going to come from. So that doesn't necessarily mean we're all careful with money, though. But yeah, you can certainly understand. I mean, they were volatile times. I mean, the war wasn't long over. The economy wasn't buoyant. So yeah, you can understand somebody being tight. Like, you talk to Bob Monkhouse, for example, people like that, or you read a lot of their comics of that era, they mentioned the fact that he was tight, but always in the context that he was very generous with them, because he was always apparently very generous with his time, for example. He would always talk to audiences outside, and Bob Monkhouse talks about the fact that he offered him 10 bob for a joke, I think something like that, which was unusual. So I think he was probably tight in terms of not buying a drink for strangers. But it's funny how that applies to a lot of comics. A lot of comics come with that baggage of being tight. At one stage, if you talk to anybody about any of the old comics, either they'll have been an alcoholic, which no one ever mentioned in the books, or they'll be really tight, which no one ever mentioned in the books. There's always one of those two epithets that apply to every comic. And I presume in years to come now, people will be doing documentaries about Harry Enfield, and they say, of course, he was really tight with his money. You know, it's like, it does seem to me it's one of those things that people associate with comedians.
The great thing everyone quotes to me about Max, he was extremely generous in certain ways. He was very charitably minded. And I had long chats with his missus at one particular stage, and she said, well, he was amazing because, you know, he temporarily lost his sight in the First World War. So it's always his great thing was St Dunstan's, the blind charity and all this. She said, we have this big house, she said, just outside in Brighton there. And she said, I came home, I've been shopping one day, and he's there, Max, and he said, better get packed up, Catherine, he said, because I'm giving the house to St Dunstan's. And he gave the house, the whole bloody issue to St Dunstan's to use as a home for a blind serviceman. She said he was terribly like that with charities, and I think it must have put the wind up Max like there's no tomorrows when he was temporarily blind in the First World War. But this was his great charity. But he certainly was very generous over things like that. That's always been quoted to you by people who really knew Max very well. And was a very famous agent, impressarios, sort of put it on Weeks of Variety in our business, called Billy Marsh, you know. And Billy Marsh told me the story himself. He said he used to use Max a lot, you know, on Variety, but it was always, of course, top of the bill and everything. And they played one particular place, he said, and the business was terrible, he said, and he said, I came out on the wrong side, I couldn't pay wages or anything. He said, and the Monday after we finished this particular week, he said, a cheque arrived from Max Miller, you know, to cover the deficit of what I'd lost on the week, he said, and the note inside said, don't forget, Bill, you never lose money with Miller. Rather than, anyone saying, God blimey, we never even made the wages. Max, in effect, was saying, don't you tell anybody. Billy mentioned it because I don't think any performer ever in the history of show business had ever paid up like that.
There's a fella won £75,000 in the pool, £75,000. And his father said, son, what are you going to do with all that money? He said, Dad, I'm going to give you £1 to start with. His father said, £1? He said, you lousy, £1? So what are you going to do with the rest? He said, I'm going to get married and go all around the world, then come back and settle down. He said, Dad, what are you going to do with your £1? He looked straight at the boy, looked him right in the eyes, and he said, son, I'm going to marry your mother.
Max Miller was really in his métier in the theatre with a big audience, playing to that audience. He was a theatre man, a stage performer. But, put it this way, for someone who'd done hardly any radio, when he did appear, and he only did a few guestings in Midday Music Hall and Henry Hall's Guest Night, which Bill Worsley produced, he didn't fail. He didn't go a storm like he does in the theatre, but he still got over. And Bill Worsley, who was one of the top light entertainment producers at the time, was always very adventurous, and he persuaded Max to come out of retirement and appear as a guest in Midday Music Hall. Now, you would think this comedian who was known for naughtiness and suggestiveness, what some people would those days call vulgarity, but by today's standard, no, it wasn't. And you also have to remember that in the 50s, the censorship on radio was absolutely incredible. You couldn't say damn or blast or thing. You could say gosh. And there was a list, actually, that producers had of all the words that were not to be used. I wish I had a copy of it, because it contained every vulgar word you can think of and every crude word, as well as some quite simple ones. But Max came on to this Midday Music Hall show. I was doing a spot in it. He did material which was acceptable for that time in the 50s with censorship on the radio. But because he's such a great comic and such a great timer, he went a storm.
Our producer, Bill Worsley, he upset me this morning, and I really mean that. He did really upset me. When I got here about 11:15... he said, you look nice and fit, Max. He said, where have you been? On your holidays? I said, holidays? I said, I don't go anywhere much. He said, I'm not surprised. If I wore clothes like you, I don't think I'd go anywhere either. And then he said, Max, I know you write most of your own songs. I know you write most of the things, but I tell you what, he said, I bet you a pound. He said, I bet you a pound you can't write a 4-line verse using the word pound in it. You've got to use the word pound in it. He said, I bet you a pound you can't do it. I said, I bet you a pound I can. So this is what I wrote. I'll read it to you. My sweetheart Mary had a mole, a thing she would not show me. It was beneath her dignity, and that's a pound you owe me.
I think radio was scared of Max Miller. I think they were frightened of the material. And Max had a reputation in this day and age. I mean, he was just completely childish humour, really. But in those days, the announcers used to wear a dinner jacket to read the time on the wireless. Don't upset the valves, you know. I think the hierarchy were frightened to death of Max Miller, creating a storm, you know. I think the BBC was scared of him, but he would have worked on radio, there's no question. Not on television. Wouldn't have worked on television, because Max was about his relationship with an audience, with a live audience, and that's a very intimate thing which doesn't translate on television. Ken Dodd had the same problem. And Ken Dodd and an audience is one of the great sights you'll ever see, but it doesn't translate onto television because it's such an intimate relationship, and his act, Ken Dodd's act, Max Miller's act, relies so entirely on that rapport, individual intimacy with the studio audience. The audience at home is alienated because you're not part of that. You're watching two people being intimate, you know, the audience and Max Miller. And it's not nearly the same experience as being in the audience and being stared at and looked at and watched. And if you laugh out of place, suddenly his eyes will dart and catch you and smile at you or ad-lib. And in an audience, you feel part of that, which you don't at home.
The TV studio is an environment that doesn't suit him. I think he was one of those rare comics that really the live arena was the only place that he thrived. I mean, there are one or two cameo roles you see of him in 30s films. When one he's playing a barrow boy and one he's playing a spiv, I think, unimaginatively. But whereas, say, people like the Crazy Gang or even George Formby, you know, fantastic stage shows, but on film, it worked just as well. But his manner, that conspiratorial manner, that drawing the audience in, really is something that could only be effective in a stage environment where they've only got him to look at. When if you got him in a studio where he's got cameras in front of him and then he's got a rail before the audience, so he's got that gap between the audience, it doesn't really work. And if you're looking at him on a camera on a TV screen, you don't get that sense of being invited in, of intimacy, because the TV brings everybody into your house anyway. You know, TV invites everybody in, sort of thing. So you don't get that sense of it's just you sharing a special moment. And you know, I think you have to listen to live recordings. That's when you get a sense of how consummate an artist he was and how good his timing was. And it's a fantastic sense when you listen to him live. There's total uproar at some of the things he says. You know, that fantastic laughter of release. And he's brilliant at timing because he waits until you can hear a pin drop, and his demeanour is such that they quite quickly stop themselves laughing because they know that the next thing is likely to top it. And it's a brilliant kind of up and down, I hesitate to use the word roller coaster, but he really controls an audience in a fantastic manner, and that's something you can't get a sense of if you listen to sort of staged radio shows or staged TV performances, you know.
Put the lights up, put the lights up. Do you know what I've got in here? Do you know what I've got? It's not me gas mask, it's not me gas mask. Hitler's secret weapon I've got in here. Look. German sausage.
That's something that I do as well, though, that he does. He repeats it over and over again. It's like an old-fashioned thing, isn't it?
Harry Hill.
You know what I've got in here? You know what I've got in here? You know what I've got in here? No, what have you got in there? Well, Hitler's secret weapon, of course, the German sausage. And then he produces a large German sausage to howls of laughter.
I've seen one very late, recording me very late. It's either the late 50s or the early 60s I saw. And he had that kind of sadness as well, because it wasn't long before he died. And by that stage, the flamboyant suit looks a bit sad when it's an elderly man wearing it. And also you kind of got the sense that, you know, the musical days were long gone by the time he did his TV appearance. So it's almost like watching an old dog beg for a biscuit. And it's kind of, while it's got sort of novelty value, there's a sadness in it as well. Although, having said that, possibly only a sadness shared by other comics. I'm not sure whether punters or civilians, for want of a better word, would feel that same sadness. But there is, I find it quite poignant watching a comic still with the ability and the persona, but obviously out of his time. You know what I mean? The 60s were about to start and his era had gone, and you can kind of see that in his eyes in a sense, which is very sad.
and never appreciated Max Miller until I started doing comedy myself. And I bought a CD of him live. And there's one where he comes out and the audience just go crazy for it, and you thought, there's a real star. And a lot of what he does seems to me very modern.
The thing that always gets me from the early 80s is the use of the term alternative comedy. I met all these so-called alternative comics that to me were just funny. They weren't alternative to me. I mean, I suppose the phrase was coined to suggest that alternative meant it wasn't sexist and it wasn't racist. But to me, they were people that made me laugh, people that didn't make me laugh. And I think one of the first truly alternatives was Max Miller. And for me, I think he is alternative because I came across him long after I'd seen all the other comics on Friday Night Live, and I thought, wow, this man's good.
I used to be a swimming instructor myself at Brighton. I used to take the girls out and teach them to swim if they couldn't swim. If they could swim, I wouldn't go out with them. I've got no time to waste. And I remember many years ago, in the middle of July, I took a young lady out. She couldn't swim. I went out 3 miles with her. I don't mess about on the shore. And when I got right out, I said to this beautiful woman, I said, now what would you like to do? She said, I'd like to do the breaststroke to start with. I said, well, go on, I'll stand and watch you. So I stood on my stilts and she did the breaststroke. Then she said, no, I think I'll turn over. And as she turned over, may the sand get in my eyes if I tell a lie. As she turned over, I slipped my hand underneath to hold her up, otherwise she'd go down. And I'm entitled to do that because I'm the swimming instructor, you see. I've got my hand underneath, she's lying on her back, on the top of the water, her head will be about there, her feet there, my hand will be about there. No, shut up. Now, well, I've lost my place now. Listen. And all of a sudden, she gave a scream, not a very loud scream. She went, oh. Twice. I didn't hear her the first time. I was creeping up on her. I said, what are you screaming for? She said, a shrimp's bitten me. I said, don't be a mug, it's me. I said, you want confidence? She said, you want handcuffs? Now, listen. Now, listen. The following day, I took her sister out. According to her age, how far I go out. She was 35, her sister. I went out 7 miles with her. And when I got out 7 miles, I looked at this beautiful woman, 35, just going grey, on the turn she was. She started to cry. I said, what are you crying for? Have you done anything wrong? She said, no. I said, why haven't you? 35. She said, I've got the cramp. It's a shocking thing to get the cramp 7 miles out in the water. It's all right in the bedroom and get up and walk round, can't you? Just shipped the bed from the door. She said, tow me back. I got a ship and towed her back, and I got on the shore. And when I got on the shore, I put her in a tent. And just as I was leaving the tent, she put her out at the tent. She said, you better come in and massage my leg. I said, if I go in there and massage your leg, I should get the sack. Well, after I got the sack, I came out.
You see, the wonderful thing about this particular Max Miller piece is the surreal edge he's got and the way he throws things away. And you think, what was that? That was really odd. So I stood on my stilts and watched her. And I love all that. That's what I really appreciated about Max Miller. Oh, shut up. Let me go. Now, listen. And very cheeky, and I suppose what you'd now term to be sexist, but you can still hear the women in the audience. There's one in particular going, woo! You know, they loved him. He was the cheeky chappie. I also think Miller was a great improviser. I mean, I'm sure that he had his stock routine that he did around all the music halls and the theatres and that. But on some of the clips, you can tell when he's using the audience that he goes off what he's saying, a bit like Eddie Izzard, but in quite a different way, I guess. But you can tell there are times when he kind of veered off and then he'd get back to the joke again.
The other thing is that I love that of having a play-in tune. It's something that we, for various reasons, no one does much anymore, particularly on sort of what you might call the alternative circuit. No one can afford to have a band play them on. But I think that's a wonderful idea to have a little theme tune. It's that inevitability, you know the song, you know, it's a simple catchy little tune and you're just waiting for them to go off on it at the end, you know. There's nothing like having a song to finish on. It's an old-fashioned way of finishing, but it gets the audience going so much more than just a punchline, you know. It's one of the toughest things is finding a way to end your act, you know.
She's a girl that's just built to my liking. A wonderful figure is Nellie. Two rosy lips and very broad hips. And a nice little mole on her shoulder. Good night, everybody.
A fellow called Sam Kerr wrote Mary from the Dairy, and I always remember Sam saying he went backstage, so I got this idea, he said, because we all used to meet in the United Dairy just off Charing Cross Road, and he said, I was sitting down, this girl used to serve in that place, this was Sam Kerr, and he said, no, I thought her name was Mary. I thought, hey, it goes together, isn't it, like Mary from the Dairy? Marvellous. He said, I've got this idea, and I jotted down this song. He said, I went round the stage door to see Max, and I said, Max, I've got a song for you. He said, I don't want any song. You're talking about hundreds of songs. He said, no, he said, it's good. He said, Mary from the Dairy. He said, I don't know. You know, he said, Max, please. He said, look, he said, we ain't got no money. He said, me and the wife, he said, the kids, we got nothing to eat. So he said, all right. He said, so I think he gave him a fiver for it, £5, you know. He said, and I went away from there. He said, and I thought, marvellous. He said, I went home that night to the wife and I said, tonight we eat. And Max took it on. It was Sam Kerr always got a credit on it, and obviously got his PRS and all this stuff from it. But Max was old-fashioned in the fact that he always used a lot of songs in his act. He usually had a song to open with after he'd established himself with a couple of gags. He usually did 2 or 3 throughout the act, which was unusual for a patter comic as such, because he was a brilliant patter comic, but also my theory is that he wanted to spin the patter out as best he could, and it's always been an old gag that always in the middle stick in a song because it slows them down a bit and also adds a few minutes onto the time without really wasting good material. Although he was a very good comedy writer, Max, of songs, because I've got a book at home that his missus gave me, a notebook of Max's, and it's nearly all of the songs that we know about Max are in it, and nearly all written by hand, you know, and written with guitar chords underneath, because I think he wrote most of the stuff with chords for the guitar and things like this, so it was genuine. He used to say, I've written this and I've written that. Now, of course, people would sell him songs and he'd say, fine, here, here's a fiver, and he'd put his name on them, but also he did write a lot of comedy songs too. And I know that he wrote the greatest couplet in any comedy song of all time, which is one of my absolute favourites. It's in a song called The 5-Year Plan. And the lovely rhyming couplet is, he said, what about this? The coffee beans each morning for your breakfast I will grind up. At night I'll bolt the door, put out the cat, the clock I'll wind up. And that will give you tons of time for you to make your mind. Oh, wouldn't it be lovely, Mary? And that, to me, is a brilliant lyric.
I'd written a song.
Clive Allen, Max Miller's longtime pianist.
A sentimental song, which I thought he used to sometimes sing a sentimental song to finish his act with. On Wednesday morning, I played it to him and he liked it very much. Then I was surprised to hear from him. He rang me up at home and said, would you like to come on tour with me? I only work every other week, he said, because the taxman, he was being paid 6 in the pound. And he said, every other week, he said, but you can come if you like. What do you think? I said, oh, it was great. So anyway, the story goes, he picked me up at St Pancras in his lovely Rolls Royce. It was about 3 days before Christmas, and I played Mary from the Dairy, which is what he came on. Aye, I'm here, he said. And he went straight away over to where some ladies were squatting on the floor, and got this diamond ring, and he's flashed it right under 3 ladies' nose. He said, look at that, love, he says. That's a present from Santa Claus, the only man that can walk about with a bag all night and not get talked about. And the place absolutely rocked. So anyway, he went on to do about an hour and a half, and it was a wonderful experience. And I wrote a thing for him called
Never Let a Woman Wear the Trousers. In other words, brother, you'll never be free. Never let a woman wear the trousers. Brother, you'll never be free. See that she always wears the blouses. That's a little advice from me. If you're not too careful, you'll be standing at the sink. She'll be standing at the bar buying the boys a drink. So never let a woman wear the trousers. Brother, you'll never be free. Now, that's to give you an idea. I'm not a singer. I'm here to make you laugh. So you can relax, because there's nothing in my act today that I wouldn't like your mother to hear. In fact, I don't think there's anything in my act that your mother hasn't heard already. And that goes for the daughter as well. You can't help liking him, can you?
You certainly can't. Let's leave the last word to Roy Hudd.
I always remember one of the last weeks that he did. I worked with him, and that was in the early 60s. I remember him saying, and I mean, you know, business was pretty terrible then because television had got a grip, and the big old theatres, they were like, you know, it was like the death of the dinosaurs, really. You know, there was great big places and that, but they were all terribly fly-blown and run down, and you used to get about 3/4 of a house on a Saturday, second house, and that was the best house of the week, and the rest was pretty sad. But I always remember Max saying to me, he said, oh, you got to get out of this game, son. He said, it's dead and gone, you know. And I mean, it used to be his great catchphrase that he used to use in his act, when I'm dead and gone, the game's finished. He always used to say, not bad, is it, lady? When I'm dead and gone, that game's finished. And it was just about right and all, because when Max did pack it in, that was the end of Variety.
On There'll Never Be Another Max Miller, which was produced by John Pidgeon and Jeremy Pascal, you heard Clive Allen, Jimmy Casey, Barry Cryer, Kevin Day, Michael Grade, Harry Hill, Josie Lawrence, George Melly and Nicholas Parsons.
More? a Palomine, a master builder. See? So he said to his little boy, ran about Christmas time, because he got Christmas coming there, you see, and he said to his little boy, he said, what would you like for Christmas? So the boy said, I'd like a baby brother. The master builder said, we couldn't finish the job in time. He said, you can have a gun or a horse. He said, no, I don't want a gun, I don't want a horse. I want a baby brother. The fella said, I told you we can't finish the job in time. He said, well, you can put some more men on the job. Now, listen.
I'm Graham Garden. Join me next week for There'll Never Be Another Frankie Howard.
No. No. Well, what? Oh, no. No, I'm glad you asked.